Hello, my name is Dr. Randolph Wilt, and today we're going to be talking about power and how we use power in negotiation. You'll see on the screen here it says power in politics. The reason why it says that is because the sense of using power in negotiation is very similar to the way that they use power in politics. So let's go into first what is a definition of what a power would be. So when we look at that, let's look at these definitions. Power has been contested for many years. It's a very contested concept because a lot of people have different ideas of power. It's hard to explain, define, and power concerns the individual and how they exert their will. That's the key, how they exert their will over on others. Power is the ability to produce an intended outcome and to overcome resistance. So those are kind of what power is all about. Now, why do people use power? Well, they do it because they're trying to support their own desire to maybe change the status quo and, see what it says, number 3 there, ambition. Some people use power to get ahead, to use the ambition. And you probably know people like that everything they do is like a power play. It's always going to be a power issue. So some people, they enjoy playing it. They enjoy becoming, use of power as a means to control other people. And like I said, you probably have known people like that. I have. I've known people like that throughout my life, particularly in the corporate section, where they will use power just to get their way and just to show that, that they have more say over something than I would. Power is a long game. It's something that is not something that happens real quickly. Once you deal with people with power, it continues. It just keeps continue after year. And also, it's thought that if you play a hard game of power, that you're going to be winning. That's what some people think, but literally it's not, because if you understand power and how they're using power, you can use it against them. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. So how do you handle power? Well, first of all, I want to tell you, back several years ago, I was at Oxford. And when I was at Oxford, I was working on a degree, and I was learning this pedagogical, which is pedagogy is how you teach, but it's also is using pedagogy in organizational change. And we were using that to learn in management. It says here how to be a polymath, which basically means how to look at other things to help you with your core discipline. My core discipline, of course, is negotiation. Also, it's organizational behavior and leadership. But I learned that pedagogy in negotiation could really be strengthened with these 3 concepts: belief, intent, and practice. Now, I use this in organizational change, but I really have learned to use this when you're using power and how you select power in negotiation. So belief. What do you believe? What do you believe is right? What do you believe is wrong? What do you believe is true? What do you believe is false? Now, we do this anyhow in negotiation, but this is a case where you had to think about, in terms of power, what do you believe actually is the power you have? How can you use it? What do you believe their power is? How do you think they're using it? And then that's your intent. Now that you know your power, and we're going to talk about types of power here in a moment, how do you intend to use those different powers to get an end result? And then, of course, that is the practice. What are you going to do to actually get it? And this will make more sense here in a moment, because the different things you're going to do, I'm going to show you a video that helps you understand that more in detail. But first of all, what type of power do you have? What type of power does the other party have in negotiation? Now, when you're talking about power, it doesn't matter if it's negotiation or if just life in general, because these are the foundational powers. Now, there's more than just this. I'm just showing you some of them. So there's some other powers in there, but I'm just going to show you some of the ones I look at, particularly when I'm looking at negotiation. The first one is what we call the power of coercion. This is power based upon the perception that a person can administer consequences, punishment. So you sit there and say, okay, how would that work in negotiation? Well, think about this. You're trying to buy hundred thousands of these widgets, these products, and the other party, for some reason, they don't really like you. They tell you, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sell them to you. I'm sorry, I don't care what you're going to offer, I'm just not going to sell them to you. In corporate organizations, you see this happening all the time, where the coercion is kind of like, if you don't get your work done, you're going to have to stay late and do it, or you may have to come in on the weekend. So it's kind of a punishment. In academics, of course, we see this all the time. You don't do good on paper, you get a lousy grade on it. Then you have connection power. Connection power is when you're associated with someone of high influence or high importance. So this is quite often often a very important concept within negotiation. So this is kind of like where you may have connection to someone else, to another vendor, or maybe you have connection to other clients who have money too that can buy the product. Think about in industry, your connection may be with other companies that can support you, or maybe other companies. I always like to look at things like, people like Steve Jobs when he was alive. He knew Bill Gates very well. He knew different people. That connection power is important. And think about in the case of politics. How do you get elected? Is by the connection you have to major donors, to other people in the party, to other senators, people of influence. Now, going back to coercion, here's the flip of the coercion. This is reward power. This means you can reward people. So in negotiation, you may go in there and someone may have the reward power that they can give you the contract. I've been in negotiations before where there was no reward power. I'm kind of like, okay, I'll give you this much money for the products, and they come back and say, okay, we have to get back with you. Okay, what do you mean I had to get back with me? Aren't you the person who can make the decision? No, they did not have the power to make the ultimate decision. They just were collecting the data and then they had to come back. So reward power is very, very important. You can imagine same thing like in politics. How does the president reward people? They give them roles in their cabinet. Maybe they make them an ambassador. Of course, in academics, we reward people by, you did a great job. You made a great grade on things. Then legitimate power. This is probably the one that's probably sometimes the most understood, but also one of the greatest power, because that means they are appropriately put in the position as a title or a role to make the decision to have the power. So let's say, for example, you've been elected by the shareholders and the board of directors to be the CEO of the company. You've got legitimate power on that. I was appointed by the university in my role. I have legitimate power to do that. But have you ever negotiated or talked to someone who you find out, well, okay, actually they don't have the power. They don't have the reward power, and they're truly not the negotiator. They're not the buyer, or maybe they're not the person who can make the decision to sell you the products on it. So they don't have the legitimate power. You see this sometimes where you have a company where the old man, the father, the mom, they run the company and they're bringing their kids, but their kids, even though they have the title and they're part of the family, they have the legitimacy because they're part of the family, but they may not have the legitimacy to actually go in there and make the decisions for the mom and the dad. Next one is a reverent power. Reverent power, basically, the easiest way to say this is that they're trustworthy, they're good communicators, they're charismatic. There's a lot of people who have reverent power that may not have legitimate power, that may not have coercive reward power, but people believe that people like them. And go back to the example I gave you about the son and the daughter. I've been in situations before where the son is on the negotiation table on the other side of me. I'm talking to them. I really like them. I mean, they're just, boy, I tell you, I trust them. They're really good. And they have that reverent power because they're just really likable, but unfortunately they don't have that legitimate power where they can make the decision. Informational power. Now, this one gets a little complicated because information means that they have information. They have information that they can actually go out there and get the information. So, for example, a good example here would be is that Cal's the CEO of a company. We wanted to get some sales consulting, new sales tactics, new sales leadership. So we reached out to a consulting group that had a lot of information about how sales are being done this year compared to, let's say, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years back. So you may bring in someone who has a lot of information. At the same time, I have a lot of information in my particular position here in academics because I have multiple degrees in multiple areas. And I use it, just like I was telling about the information I got from Oxford about pedagogical traits in organizational change and in negotiation. And then the last one is expertise, expert power. Now, you may say this sounds like information. It's very similar to it. Expertise is something that you are the expert in it. So I'll give you the example here. Bill Gates, Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, they were all experts in their knowledge. Elon Musk, certainly an expert in understanding a lot of different things. So they had the expertise. Think about a politician who has been they've been a senator, they've been on the cabinet of a few prior president, they became the vice president, then they became the president. Okay, they have a lot of expertise. Information, they have a lot of information. They may be lacking some information. Maybe they don't understand much about the economy, but they understand a lot about foreign policy. But expertise means that they're coming in with a lot of knowledge, personal knowledge. And these are the different powers that you see, plus others that pop up in negotiations. So which is the strongest of all of these? Well, it kind of depends. Depends on the situation. So for example, Steve Jobs here, what does he have? Well, he was probably the smartest entrepreneur, one of the smartest that's ever lived. Now, I can't say that about him being a manager. I've heard lots of tales about he was a terrible manager and the way he treated people. He had coercive power, certainly, as a manager and CEO. He had a lot of connection out there. I mean, he knew Michael Dell, Bill Gates, all these people. He could reward people or punish people. He was legitimate because you remember they fired him as CEO. Then the board of directors came back and hired him back as CEO. So he was legitimate power. Referent power, he was very charismatic with the board. He was charismatic with the shareholders. Probably not so much with his staff on that. And he knew how to go out and get the information. He had sources, he could get information, he had a lot of expertise, but the expertise was very limited. It was limited in the realm of what he dealt with. And I always said about Steve Jobs is that he really didn't have the expertise in being a manager. He had it as being maybe a leader, but not being a manager. Donald Trump, now you remember back in 2016 when he was running for president against Hillary Clinton. Look at these things. Did he have coercive power? Well, he did in industry. He had coercive and reward power in industry. Did he have in politics? No, because he had not been in politics before. He did have a lot of connection out there, particularly in industry. He had a connection with very major corporations and people who were donors too. But legitimate. He was legitimate in industry, but was he legitimate in politics? No, because he had never been in the political world before. He had never been a senator or representative or a governor, but being a CEO, very, very legitimate on things. This is what caused people to really, when you're looking at the difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there's a big difference in terms of these, because go down there, you can see like the information, the expertise. He had expertise in business, not in politics. He did not fully understand foreign affairs. He did understand economics and finance. Hillary Clinton had been the Secretary of State. She had a lot of expertise in foreign affairs. She had expertise in, let's say, the finance, the economics. She had a lot of political expertise. But one of the things that got her in trouble was a lack of referent power. Some people didn't like her, just like some people didn't like Donald Trump in there. So it's always kind of interesting when you start weighing these, and that's how you you do those pros and cons. It's kind of like the scales of, do they have more power here, more power there. Now, Prince Harry, interesting character here. Probably no coercive, probably no reward. He can't knight anybody. He's not, I think he's no longer in that realm of the British royal family. He does have a connection. His father is the king. Legitimate, well, yeah, he was born into it. He'll always be the prince, but does he speak on behalf of the royal family? No, not anymore. He did for a while. So his legitimate powers is kind of like when you're looking at Trump. He had it in the corporate world, didn't have it in the political world. And now, once he got elected president, then he built up that legitimate power in the political world. Prince Harry's is the opposite. He actually had it in the British royal family in UK politics, but when he left the British royal family, moved to the US, he lost it in the British royal family. Yeah, he's reverent. He has a certain amount of expertise, but in his case, the longer he's away from Britain and away from the British family, the less he has an expertise. And then there is Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk is another interesting character. director, because corporately he has the coercion, the reward. He has a lot of connection out there. My gosh, he's like Steve Jobs. He knows everybody. Everybody knows him. Legitimacy. I mean, he just he owns multiple companies. Major stockholder, even though he doesn't have the controlling interest in it. But the shareholders and the board of directors have elected him. Reverend power. Some people say they don't like him. Other people say they do like him. He has a tremendous source of information, and expertise is interesting because he knows how to run a business. Does he really know how to build the spaceship in SpaceX? No, he depends upon other people to do it. His expertise is how you run the company, not how you build the product, the car, or let's say the SpaceX. The last one here is Pope Francis, another very interesting one. Does he have coercive reward? Sure, he can. He can appoint people to roles as bishop, or he can excommunicate. Connection power, yes. Many head of states, he has connection power with them. I'm going to skip over legitimate and say, is he reverend? Yes. He has reverend power. He can talk to people. People say he's charismatic. He has information, and of course he has expertise because he was a cardinal before I think he was a bishop, not Catholic, so I'm not sure about this. He was a priest. But let's go back to this legitimate, because this again is very interesting, because legitimate is one that it can come and go and can come different ways. Now remember, when you elect the president of the United States, the people are electing the president. You elect the delegates to go to the convention. When you elect a congressman, a senator, you are electing them. So you have the power. When the shareholders elect the CEO, they're making the election. But in the case of the Pope, it's not quite that way. Who selects the Pope? Well, it's the College of Cardinals. Now, who selects the cardinals? Do the people select the cardinals? Is it a democracy? No, it's not. The cardinals are selected by the Pope. So now you got the situation where the Pope is being selected by their peers, basically. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's still legitimate, but it's not the legitimacy that you would see like in the United States with a political election or with a selection of CEO of a company. So this is a case where you're seeing that it's the peers who are selecting him. But we put our trust in the peers to speak on our behalf. So if they select the Pope, then the Pope becomes legitimate. Even though he's not selected by the people, he's selected by his peers in there. So this is interesting about legitimacy. So Pope Francis has all these power bases, including legitimacy in there. And as you can see, most of them have them, but you can see where people like Donald Trump, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and particularly Prince Harry, they're a little bit lower in some of these powers, and some of them are higher than others in those different powers. Now, when you look at the different types of power, there's two ways to look at it: personal and positional. Personal means these are powers you have. No matter if you are a leader, a CEO, or you're the homeless man on the street. Okay, you may have the referent power, you're likable, people respect you. You may have an expertise. You may be very specialized. You may have a lot of information. You have sources of information that you can get from, and you may have a certain amount of connection, but you may not be using it. I kind of joke around about being the homeless man on the street. I've got a lot of education. I've got the expertise. I like to think that, I am trustworthy, likable. And I know a lot of people out there, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be a CEO of a company or going to be, in a high level position. I may just be sitting on the street corner with a sign. But is that positional power is where you use those personal power to go into the position. And that becomes where all of a sudden you're the boss, legitimate power. You get this reward power, which is also the coercion power, and the resource, which what we talk about is positional power. We'll talk about that in just a moment from now. So you see that, those personal powers will move you into the positional power. But of course, there are some people who are in positional powers who have no personal power. I've heard many stories about people who become CEO because maybe they have the connection, but they really don't have anything else. So they get put in positional power and they pick up the legitimacy and the reward and the coercion, but they don't have the expertise, they don't have the information, they don't have the reverence, and therefore they fail in the positional power. So typically, when you look at a negotiation, you look at, which one, if not both, does a party have on the other side of the negotiation table. So it's kind of important. Now, sources of power in negotiations. First of all, there's information. Do they have the information? Do they know what it takes? Do they have the personality? That's that referent power. And positional power. Now, positional power, are they, and this says class and culture, but literally what I'm referring to are they the CEO or the chief buyer? Do they have all that? Now, we're going to talk in a few minutes here about the possessional power, but right now, are they in the position that they can make the decisions? That positional power also gives them the coercion and the reward. Do they have the resources? That's possessional power. And network. That'll be the informational power and the connection power. All these things are very important. Now I'm going to show you a short video here that talks about the challenge of power in negotiation.
In every negotiation, there is a power balance, and you are not always on the right side of that. So you've got to maximize the power that you do have. There are three big sources of power when it comes to business negotiation. First is alternatives and options. Second is resources and network. And finally, knowledge and analysis. When we're talking about alternatives, you've got two questions you've got to prepare an answer to. One, when will you walk away from this negotiation? And two, where will you go next? There's an old rule in negotiation that the one that needs the deal less is going to win. Your main power is your ability to walk away. Next is resources and network. What's your superpower? What differentiates you from the competition? Now, to be more powerful, you've got to figure out not only what is your superpower, what are you good at, but how you can package it so that he understands it helps him. The final source of power is knowledge and analysis. And here I want you to answer one question. Is he motivated by hope for gain or fear of loss? If he's a hope negotiator, he wants to use your services to do more of what they're already doing. He just wants to do it bigger and faster and newer. If he is a fear-motivated negotiator, he wants to use your services to fix a problem, to turn around an ugly trend, or to comply with someone else. He wants services that are cheaper, quicker, and from an outside perspective. So to sum up, you can start boosting your power right away by building more alternatives, figuring out if the guy across from you is motivated by hope or by fear, and credibly demonstrate that you have an integrated solution already in mind for how to solve his problem. That means how to allay his fears or feed his greed. Thanks very much for Flash MBA. I'm Andrew Hubert. I'll talk to you again soon.
Apologize, it didn't load quite as fast as I thought it would, but that is a really, really good video. I give credit to ATH Partners. I enjoy their videos. They do a wonderful job. Always, you can go to YouTube and you can search them out and watch some of their other videos. They're geared for MBAs and very, very good videos. So I give them a little shout out there, ATH Partners. Now, a couple of things that he brought up that I thought was good is that he talks about alternative and options, knowing when to walk away. That's a classic science of negotiation, knowing when that you're outmatched, or maybe it's just not going the way it should, and you start looking at alternatives to things, and sometimes you gotta walk away. But what I really liked was his concept about understanding that the knowledge side of this is knowing, are they negotiating on hope for gain or fear of loss? Now let me explain that a little bit more in detail. The way I understand it, and this is the way I interpret this, is that hope for gain is a person who they're trying to negotiate with you. Maybe they're using powers to try to build a relationship. They're trying to help you and help themselves too. It's kind of like a win-win. But the fear of loss is, like I said, they're negotiating on price. They're negotiating because they're trying to get the most and that they can, because if they lose the negotiation, they feel like I've lost everything. They don't. And those are kind of the hard negotiators. I do want to also tell you is that, let's say you're trying to go out there and buy 100,000 widgets. I always use widgets because I'm old school. That's the product that is not a product, but apparently now it's a product. But, this has happened to me before, excuse me, where I've negotiated for widgets. In one year, they were very hard negotiators about the widget. They are hard on the price. They were not flexible. But the next year, they were very easy. They were very accommodating. Matter of fact, they were willing to keep going down. I couldn't figure out what's going on until like a couple months later, when I found out that they lost their other client and who they were selling to. So now they're pretty much desperate. And if they hadn't sold it to my company, then, that could have been a tremendous financial loss that could maybe even push them into bankruptcy. So that's another way to look at fear of loss. I mean, the fear of loss is sometimes where people are negotiating out of fear. In the process, they're playing a hard negotiator, but also I've seen it is where their fear that if they don't get it, that everything is going to collapse on them. Now, the other form of power is possessional. Now, I'm sorry, it says possession power. Okay, sorry about that. But possessional power is when you have something that you can use that the other person doesn't have. So I'm going to let you watch a short little movie clip here. You probably have seen this movie before, but it's really going to help to understand how possessional power works.
For nearly 3,000 years, man has searched for the lost Ark of the Covenant.
The Bible speaks of the Ark leveling mountains and laying waste to entire regions. Not something to be taken lightly. No one knows its secrets.
Jones do realize what the Ark is. It's a transmitter. It's a radio for speaking to God.
Army which carries the Ark before it is invincible.
The Ark. It is their TARDIS. Then it is something that man was not meant to disturb. It is protected by forces beyond imagination. It is desired above all treasures on earth by those who are good, prosper, and those who are evil.
Yes, I know you.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. Here you go.
We have no time. Still want the Ark. It has been loaded onto a topic for Kyle.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. A film from Steven Spielberg and George Lucas.
Okay, well, you know that movie. If you haven't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, you got to see it. It's a Hollywood classic, and I love the movie, but it kind of helps to explain what possessional power is. You remember the whole thing is about trying to find the lost Ark of the Covenant. Now, among other degrees, I have a master's in theology and did a lot of studies about things. But let me tell you a little bit about the Ark of the Covenant. First of all, this is what the Ark of the Covenant supposedly looks like. It's lost. That's why the Nazis were trying to find it, because you heard the guy say is a radio to God. Well, not exactly. The whole concept of the Ark is that when Moses got the Ten Commandments, that they built the Ark and they put inside of it the Ten Commandments. They put in his brother Aaron's staff, who was the high priest, and they put in manna, which was food that God provided the Hebrews in the wilderness when they left Egypt. And they had this, and they would carry this ark with them all over. They would carry it into battle. The Levite tribes, who were the priestly tribe, they would carry the ark. If anybody touched it, excuse me, they would immediately die. But the thought is that God resided at the ark, in the ark. Well, he didn't reside in the ark, but this was the belief. And anytime they carried it into battle, the Israelites would win. And even at the point, there's a couple parts of the Old Testament where it talks about where the Israelites are fighting the Philistines, and the Philistines see the ark, immediately they say, we're going to lose. Now, that's possessional power, because that ark controlled the power that the Israelites would win a battle. Now, if later on you start seeing where they start realizing that, the Israelites start saying that it's just this ark is what's causing us to win. No, it was not the ark. It was God that was causing them to win. And later we see the Babylonians conquering Israel, taking them up to Babylonia, and they take the ark, and the ark is lost. And today it's still lost. People say it's different places, but it's still lost. Now, okay, so you can see the thing about the Ark and the Covenant is that the tribes of Israel, there are 12 tribes, that as long as they had the ark, they felt like they had the power of God to accomplish anything, to win any war and whatever it was. And once they lost it, then they didn't have the power anymore. Okay, that's how that worked back then. But what are some other examples of possessional power? Well, this is a picture of in the Breakers. This is called the Breakers. This was a summer mansion of one of the robber barons. I'll show you some of them here in a second here. This is actually outside of Newport, Rhode Island. Who are the robber barons? People like John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, J.P. Morgan, Chase, J.P. Morgan. We also call them the captains of industries because they had tremendous wealth. And when you talk about possessional power, you look at the wealth they had. They built their companies from nothing. They had all the stock and ownership in the company. Several of them never publicly made their company. I said made it public. They kept it as private. And they developed all this wealth. They would have all these mansions, and they were considered basically American royalty. Now, American, we have no royalty. That makes us different from all the countries basically in Europe. They had kings and queens and all that. And but we have no royalty. But we started looking at these captains of industries being the Royal Americans, but all that's kind of dropped off now. But a lot of it is based upon because they had so many possessional powers. Now, what are some examples of possessional powers? I've already talked about like stock ownership. There's so many companies out there that are still privately owned that, they have all the stock. They don't have to go to shareholders or a board of directors. They can make their own decision. It says patents and ownership. A lot of companies out there follow the Thomas Edison route. Thomas Edison, when he was inventing the light bulb and everything else, anybody who wanted to work for him, they had to sign a document that said that their patents, anything they got patented, belonged to Thomas Edison's company, which is, by the way, General Electric. That's where it came out of. And we see that today. And it makes sense. If you're working for someone like Dell Computer or whoever, and they're paying you and you devise a new product, then it does belong to Dell, or they may actually share the patent with you. Then assets like factories, those are possessional power. Think about someone like Ford or GM. They have all these factories every place. That's a tremendous sense of possessional power. So when they're talking to people and they're looking at, like, we're talking to unions or they're talking to vendors or whatever, they got all these assets that they can pull upon. So that's kind of like eternal wealth. That's just like having a lot of money like those robber barons had. And the last one there is like the robber barons are the captains of industry, wealth and spouse. There's a lot of people who got into companies because they already had the money. They didn't start poor and build it up. They had the money, so they said, I'm going to start this company up. But you see where it says spouse, that's interesting because another possessional power, believe it or not, could be the spouse. And you see this quite often happening where the person who actually is starting the company may not be the wealthy one in the relationship. It may be the wife or the husband or the father-in-law or something like that. John Kerry, remember, he ran for president and he was a senator, and then I think he was Secretary of State for a while. I can't remember all that. His wife is the heiress to the Heinz Empire, H.J. Heinz, the people who make the Heinz ketchup. So she has all the money, and that's helped support a lot of his campaigns, so that's a possessional power. It's kind of, I hate to use that word, that your spouse or your in-laws or whatever have the money and they're the power back. So that's kind of sometimes the way it works. Now, power is important, but it's how you use your power, because power by itself, like I told you, you may have the personal power, but if you don't use it correctly and build a team with that power, you're going to be sitting there, like I use that expression. You could be the homeless man or homeless woman on the street with all those personal powers, but no no positional power. So using power, and building a team is very important. And that's how do you become a good leader. So I'm going to show you another little video here about what we call fellowship, because having power doesn't do anything unless you have the followers, people who you embrace, who help you to move that power you've got from just being personal to also being a positional power. So with that, I'd like for you to watch this video.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out, you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Well, that video is, to me, fascinating. At first, you start seeing, you think this is kind of crazy, and then the more you watch it, the more sense it makes, and by the end, it makes total sense that you can't have a leader without followers. And it takes a group of followers to keep a leader in control. That's what all this has to do with about power. Now, one-on-one on a negotiation table, you're not necessarily going to have the followers, but power in general has to have followers. Otherwise, you just have personal power. To reach that positional power, you have to have the followers that you treat like equals, that you treat good. And the thing that I want to point out here to you is that sometimes you may not have all those powers. You may not have the coercive or reward. You probably have that. You may have legitimate, but you may not have the expertise. You may not have the information. You may not even have the connection. But if you got the right followers, you may have followers who have that expertise, followers who have that information power, followers who have the possessional power. That's always great. Have a follower who has all the money and all the resources, or a follower who has all the connections. They know important people in it. So today, what we talked about in power, in politics and negotiation and organizations, in power and negotiations, we kind of talked about the different types of power and how they play out and how you need to look at the person on the other side of the table and the power that they have and which ones they've got. I mean, if they don't have legitimate power, if they're not the person who can make the decision, they can't reward you, why are you talking to them? Why aren't you talking to the person who can make the decision or the person who can reward you the contract or whatever it is? Then, like I said in that first video, know your alternatives, know your option. And I love that part about watch out for the people who are out there for fear and losses, but you want the people there for hope, for gains and hope and gain. So always think about that. Then that's developing the knowledge about the other person. Think about the other person's power, what they have. Always be aware that possessional power is so important, because if they come in there and they hold all the cards, if they come in there and they hold all the product and you have nowhere else to get the product, they have a tremendous amount of possessional power. They come in there and they have maybe 7 or 8 different people who want to buy the product. They're holding a lot of possessional power. We call it basically resource power on that. Then let's talk about those followers. Align followers if followers are available. It may not, like I say, it may not be important on the one-on-one, but as you start developing teams of negotiators, think about if you're in a corporation and you're negotiating with the union, the more you have the followers who understand you, that can be part of your team, they're bringing in certain types of power that maybe you don't have, the expertise or whatever it is. And never lose sight that power can make or break a negotiation. And I love this image here because you can see in this image here, the king has all the power, but the pawns, like I said, one pawn may have connection, one may have coercive, one may have information, one may have expertise, one may have reverend. Sometimes that team of power is stronger than the person who has all the power. And with that, I want to thank you. I appreciate you taking time to listen to this presentation today. Hope you have the rest of your days. It'll be a wonderful day.